Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Fertility Guide webinar presented by Fertility Friends Foundation. My name is Isabelle Lefebvre-Vary, and I am the Executive Director of Fertility Friends Foundation. And I'm very happy to host tonight Blair, our speaker tonight, to talk about sex, intimacy, and fertility treatments. Just a few words before we start about the foundation, and then I would introduce you, Blair. For people who don't know us, our mission is simple, but we believe very powerful. It's to make fertility care more accessible to all Canadians by removing financial barriers and offering hope through grants, education, and community support. Since our creation, we have helped dozens of families, and we have awarded over $350,000, welcomed 20 babies that were born thanks to our grants, and we have many more grant recipients pregnant at the moment. So we believe that what we do takes Canadians one step closer of achieving their dream of parenthood, and we also like to raise more awareness of the struggles that fertility patients can encounter, and that's why we're organizing this webinar tonight. It's to give a bit of resources to people who would not find it somewhere else. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you, Blair. So Blair Wexler Singer. So Blair, you are a registered social worker and psychotherapist, licensed in Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, specializing in reproductive counseling. You work sorry, at Informed Fertility. Oh, perfect, there is a slide. Informed Fertility, which is your company and a group of counselors that are really focused on reproductive health. So you work a lot with fertility patients. You hold a Master of Social Work from Columbia University and have more of 17 years of experience supporting individuals and couples through trauma, grief, loss, and the complex emotions that often accompany the fertility journey. You are also very involved in the fertility community in Canada. We were just talking about it right before this webinar, as you serve as the chair of the Counseling Special Interest Group with the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society. And you are also a member of Fertility Matters Canada, which we had a 6K walk on Sunday, which was great. Tonight, Blair, you will guide us through an open, thoughtful conversation and discussion about how fertility treatments can affect intimacy and relationships, and how couples can nurture closeness, communication, and trust through it all. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. It's a pleasure to be here, and I feel very privileged to partner and collaborate with such an amazing foundation. And my hope tonight is to really have a meaningful discussion and dialogue about something that is obviously very impactful to the community, but also very impactful in terms of helping people normalize the challenges in addition to the medical, but the emotional and the physical side of things in not just the bedroom, but in a couple's connection. So I hope that tonight will be a combination of helpful review of normalizing information of people's experiences that can often and commonly take place through a fertility journey, and also provide some really helpful, meaningful tips and tricks to guide through in a way that feels, again, a little bit more healing in this journey as well. So the first thing that I want to start with, and I apologize because I know I'm kind of navigating the screen at the same time as talking. So I will go and share that if there are questions that come up, Isabelle will be monitoring the chat. And if there are things that you want to interrupt me about, it's casual enough that my hope is that you can stop me as I go. I will obviously have a Q&A at the end, but I do want to give, recognition to what we're talking about tonight in terms of intimacy, because it is not only about sex or about orgasm. A lot of what we're talking about intimacy contains different components. So it contains components of the physical and the sexual, but also the emotional. So if you see a little bit from this slide, that can include a lot of different things. Often there is this understanding that intimacy usually equates sex, but it has way more breadth than just that. So some of those things could be in the emotional ability to go and connect with openness with a partner. It could also be in a physical way in the privacy of the bedroom or whatnot and beyond, but it could also be about physical touch. And we're going to talk much more about it tonight in terms of some ways to go beyond just what's, again, intercourse. We're going to talk about some of the intellectual components of intimacy, the spiritual components of intimacy, social intimacy as well, and allowing for there to be in many ways the other areas in addition to desire, attraction, and arousal. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like overall when we're talking about treatment. Treatment can include, and so for the purposes of this discussion, treatment can include things like trying on your own. It could include trying on your own with support of a clinic and medications. It could go and include time cycles. It can include monitoring. It could be also including IUIs and more invasive procedures like IVF. That could also have a major impact to fertility and closeness. And so some of the big things that you will maybe have known for your own journeys, or maybe just know from hearing this in chat rooms, but moving away from the spontaneity of having those connected moments into something that's more scheduled and regimented, cycle monitored and beyond can feel like a major shift in the authenticity of the moment. That could have a big impact on someone's ability to go and feel like they're able to move from a pleasure focused perspective into something that's very purposeful, which again is the goal of trying to conceive, but could also take away a lot of that additional playfulness. And we're going to talk more about that this evening. The medicalization of the process can also have a very big impact, moving from a way of having connection in the bedroom where body image and feeling of confidence can feel very much part of the trust that you're building into something that's involving other people, high touch in areas that are very vulnerable. It could include lots of pokes and bruises and sensitivity and tenderness. It could also feel very disjointed and disconnecting when people are monitoring and critiquing some of these components that are very personal. So I love the quote that's, kind of like an analogy of it's like trying to enjoy a beautiful meal while someone is constantly watching you with a clipboard, timing your bites, and grading your performance. So it could feel very much like, again, you're being graded on the performance, and that could have a big pressure to, again, perform, which goes into the next part, which is about the pressure of performing. So that could be both partners affected by that. You don't have to be the one receiving the pokes and prods to also feel the pressure of having to go and perform, especially when it's a timed, schedule type of interaction. So a lot of this is very normal to feel that type of pressure when in a fertility treatment and how that could impact intimacy. A lot of the times I end up working with people where they're describing feeling touched out. When you have so many people who have hands-on, with phlebotomists and people who are going in your very sensitive and vulnerable zones, going in having then, trying to make those connections in the bedroom could also feel very pressure filled as well. And so it's not uncommon to feel emotionally drained and not have the stamina or not have the desire to want to go and have these intimate connections when it's not, again, part and parcel of the scheduled time, because, again, it could feel very disjointed to have to put those efforts in when it's already feeling like there's so much that your body has been undertaking during those moments. Another big area that I just want to normalize too is the vast amount of hormonal and emotional changes. And that could be impacted by grief and anxiety of having to go and endure cycle after cycle without having the successes that you're hoping for. It could also be fluttered by depression and disappointment, as well as a lot of self blame. And so all of these things can have a big impact on someone's intimacy routines because of the involvement of treatment. So again, from here, I think it's important to kind of recognize a few things. Our tendencies as humans are to want to go and fix things. And that's a big component too of moving away from this sense of needing to fix things and correct and really lean into this element of connection. And that's what's going to be the main theme of what we're going to be talking about this evening, which is kind of infusing more of the connectedness into this process as opposed to the correctiveness, which can often be a very difficult thing considering how so much of treatment is about correcting something that feels like it's broken. So I think, one thing that I definitely want to highlight first and foremost is that, when it comes to intimacy, the biggest mistake that couples also find is this trap of the correction. So, focusing on the what's wrong as opposed to what can we do to bring ourselves closer to. In this, I would say a big thing is about moving away from the focus on the physical act and opening up some elements of curiosity. And that could mean understanding a little bit more about how to go and evolve some of the emotional side of this process into it. So, a great example of that is starting to ask some questions, either of yourself or even of your partner. So, part one is leaning into some of these connected elements. And that could be asking questions like, what makes you feel most desired? What would help us feel closer in this moment? Using some of these moments instead of obstacles as opportunities to lean in and ask questions of each other. And part of that is being honest about sex, being honest and have trust within the relationship that you're building to start talking about some of these things that could feel very, very heavy. I think a big thing in this is sex can often feel awkward talking with others, but it could also feel very awkward talking about with your partner. And so creating safe spaces to be able to have these discussions will be a big moment to help infuse connection into it. So, a good part to kind of think about, and we're going to go over some strategies shortly as well, is about how to reframe this into a sense of an opportunity as opposed to, again, the obstacle. And that could be creating non judgmental communication techniques by going and saying, we're going to talk openly without fear with each other about what's happening in the ways that we're connecting and the ways that we can still have connection, even if it's with the lens of treatment being involved as well. So part of that is also understanding that, this isn't only about having the resolution of having, in this case, like this quote was saying, imagine being lost in a forest, moving with, only just having the compass as the tool. That doesn't give you all of the comforts of having that proximity of being in this together. A lot of that is having the connection moments with the partner to say, we're here, we're in this together, and we're going to work through this as a unit. So another big thing that I wanted to just highlight before we go into some of the strategies of what things can do to kind of bring that connectedness and that closeness together is talking about the other areas too that can do. So talking a little bit about fluctuations that are normal goes back to, again, how we see ourselves. So in order to kind of be present in a connected relationship with a partner is also about how we connect with ourselves. And I think part of this is also understanding the fluctuations that normally happen in these changes when going into a treatment cycle. So one of the things that I think is a big one is the desire, having sexual desire. And so for some people, desire can drop because sex becomes, again, scheduled and it's tied to ovulation schedules rather than that piece of having that authenticity and that spontaneity. For others, stress and disappointment and repeated cycles can definitely dampen the arousal and make the idea of sex feel heavy. And sometimes one partner's desire can decrease while another person's can increase, and there can be a misalignment of that. So, being able to go and be open about those things will definitely help in moving things along in a way that feel a little bit more grounding. Another area, too, as we were mentioning, is the confidence that we can, not let the other partner down in these moments. And that could mean that it's moving beyond a self blame, as was mentioned previously, about feeling like this is on one person versus another. Especially in treatment, it can often be that one person feels like the responsibility lies on them. And this is a beautiful way of realigning and having these moments to kind of problem solve or manage the stressors together. It could be um, a big impact too when people feel like the changes of what's going on hormonally and what's changing in terms of cycles progressing without having the successes have an impact on someone's body image and their feelings of being desired and having the confidence to be able to connect with partners in those ways. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to look beyond the potential weight changes, the bloatedness, the bruising, the medical procedures that make people often feel very resentful, in a way to go and embrace some of those things in a way that feels safe for that partner, and allow and invite the other person to go and participate in some of those moments of touch that feels safe and inviting. So another area too with the same kind of um, topic is about sexual satisfaction. And so often it could feel like with the pressure of the above, it could feel like there's a big change in satisfaction sexually that could have an influence on a person's ability to feel confident going into a fertility cycle or a journey that feels, again, like it's going to be meaningful and not just meritful. And so I think, another kind of way of looking at this is, you know, if you are used to driving a car for pleasure purposes and going out into the world and, exploring things and going into places that feel really exciting and adventurous, and now that use of the car is really for one purpose only, which is about winning a race, the pressure can very much feel completely shifted in a way that is, again, less pleasurable and less about the playfulness of things and much more focused on a one uh like a one goal priority, and that could again make it feel very much like it's a chore as opposed to something that feels very meaningful and bonding between a couple. So with all of these components that absolutely have a play in how people feel about themselves and how they connect and relate to their partners, what does that allow for going into a treatment cycle? What does that allow for when trying to conceive? And all of these things seem to be a bit of the barriers in being able to go and have that intimacy. So there are lots of different things that could be done during the trying to conceive pathway, and there are also many things that could be happening that we're going to talk about that you can be doing for each other as you're going through different stages. So one big thing here is about communication. It's hard to go and imagine what sex is like without those connection pieces, but communication is the best foot forward and the foundation in being able to start talking about these things so that you can reinfuse intimacy into the relationship. So that could look like having check-ins, and a check-in could be, again, having that openness and honesty in the relationship to talk about these things. A good thing to keep in mind, though, is having designated times to have these discussions. Going in after work when things are busy and hectic and people don't have the opportunity to transition from a very heavy day's work into, the routine of an evening, that's maybe not the most optimal time to start talking about the intimacy. Likewise, when you're in the moment and having regimented scheduled time intercourse, that might not be also the most ideal moment to go and start having these discussions about what's working and not working. However, having designated times to really talk about these things with time limits will feel like everyone has the opportunity to be heard and validated, and allows for some of that awkwardness to be dispelled. Using language that feels very feeling focused. So often there's a strategy and a tool that we use that's talking about I statements. So describing about the feeling that it is for you. So I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling concerned, or I'm feeling tapped out. Those are things that are going to be really important to kind of validate as well. And so, paired with the communication and the expression of the emotions that one is going through is also the validation. Yes, this is hard. And I'm recognizing that is hard on both of us. Validating it doesn't make, again, it less any significant. It just makes it feel a little bit more real and allows for there to be emotional intimacy and emotional connection in that moment. So it doesn't feel so isolating. An area too that you can pair up with the intimacy factor here is also with non-sexual touch. So often there's, again, as we mentioned, this assumption that intimacy equals intercourse or orgasm. But it doesn't always have to be. There is a wide spectrum, and intimacy can look very much, or physical intimacy could very much look like and touch in a way that is non-sexual. So it could be hand holding, it could be cuddling, it could be embracing by massage, it can be doing caresses, it could be moments where there is connection with eyes. There are lots of different ways of, again, having those physical intimate moments without having penetration. And that means redefining what sex actually means. And that could be for right now. I think a lot of this is understanding that intimacy during treatment and during conception could really look like a different season than what you're used to. And so as a result of that, it can be about prioritizing different things at different moments, especially in a cycle. Often I'll speak with people and they are very concerned about having intimacy only when the doctors are telling them to, and it really can take away from the impactfulness of having those moments um, of love and affection with each other, especially if those are means in which they were present beforehand. So this might just be about redefining what that is, especially if there are moments in a cycle where you have to physically abstain or you're told to go and have intimacy in this small window of time. This could be a nice way of reimagining what that is and redefining. So maybe there are different moments in a cycle where there is more touch that's non-sexual. Maybe this is a moment in a cycle where there are more things that you're doing on an emotional level too, and redefining what playfulness looks like. And that could look like small acts and bids to connect with each other in a way that can feel um, rejuvenating, in a way that brings back some of that the lightness to the matter. So playfulness could look like doing things together that are, again, non-sexual but are connecting. And so things like making meals together, things like going on little walks or adventures together. It could go and look like doing something that's building something together, or doing a DIY project. Doing things at home could be very meaningful in the house, but also doing things outside could also be very impactful too. So small acts that could actually have big return are important to kind of consider. So I always like to encourage couples who I'm working with to go and think about things that they used to do before they were starting to have children, before they were starting to build their families, and think about ways in which they were feeling that playfulness with each other. And that could be in little um little outings that they did. It could be, again, in terms of doing activities that really bring out some of that playful side of them, and having some novelty part and parcel of the process can also be very meaningful in reestablishing some of that intimacy back into the picture. Another area, which again kind of ties this all together, as we were mentioning earlier too, is about having some moments where the talk about intimacy can be brought up in a way that is, again, at a right time and place and space, just as much as it's important to have safe zones where these conversations are not being brought up. So if in the bedroom this is an area where we're not talking about things, that's an important thing to establish. Going on date nights and having date nights where the discussion about fertility or about intimacy in a sexual way isn't talked about, that can be important to have just as much as having designated times to have these conversations. it's also important to even establish some words that could be safe words if the conversation is getting very triggering and very heavy in terms of content, to have words to be able to halt and stop the dialogue if, again, a partner is feeling unsafe in that moment or is getting a little bit overwhelming. This is where it's about reading cues from each other and allowing there to be space for everyone to feel heard and validated, but also supported in a way where no one's feeling stifled from the emotions of all of it. Another really important way of infusing intimacy into the actual treatment cycle is, again, about reclaiming what is a physical touch that doesn't have to be, again, about a clinical environment. So often in clinical settings, again, we had mentioned being very much poked and prodded. There's so much high touch in environments with the clinic, in terms of nursing staff, in terms of the clinical providers, in terms of all the things that have to go in and out of treatment monitoring. And so as such, it's really important to go and reestablish touch that feels safe and touch that feels good, especially outside of that environment. And that could include those things that are comforting and feel connecting, but also allow for there to be pleasure seeking in a way that isn't only, again, in a penetrative sense. We had talked a little bit about the validation part, and that can go very hand in hand with feeling comforted by a partner in a treatment setting where feelings are validated, where it can be very much of the lines of, I know that this is difficult and I'm here for you. It could be very much along the lines of, I'm so proud of you for, going through another one of these blood tests, and, what can I do to help out in terms of splitting up and dividing up some of the tasks that could be very burdensome for certain partners versus others. So an example of that is dividing up some of the heavy lifting when it comes to injections, dividing up some of the responsibilities about who can go and make and prepare the syringes so that the other one could go and administer, or it could be about helping out a partner with administration so it feels more of a connecting activity. Those things, even though I know it's not what we imagine to be, an intimate moment, could absolutely turn into a more intimate moment when there can be comfort in the sense that it's not so isolating. So much of intimacy can be about not feeling so alone. And so ways to go and feel connected to a partner along the way, especially by joining appointments and joining in on discussions, especially the medical discussions, could feel like a partner is there with you and that you're in this together, as opposed to feeling, again, this is a solo experience. Being able to lean in, especially if news has been shared from a clinic or you're receiving results, being able to go and have intimate moments, to share fears, to debrief, to go over hopes of a cycle upcoming, to go and laugh together in moments of some silly in between. Many a time, I'll hear from the people that I work with that they find small little things, even when they're at the clinic or in the waiting room, that they can talk about after, that just brings some lightness to it. If they end up seeing something that's, a deja vu, where they end up seeing something that feels, again, a little bit more lighthearted, they share with their partner because it brings some levity to the process. We had talked before too about having scheduled connection time together. And just to review, that could mean scheduling time together to have in the treatment cycle as treatment is going forward, to be able to go and have moments where there are times to, as we said, debrief. There are times to go and connect. There are times to go and plan. And so a lot of this is anticipating moments where in different junctures of the cycle, there can be more anxiety. There's likely to be more waiting. There's likely to be moments where the intimacy feels like the least of the priorities. Going and planning for those moments so that you can feel, again, more connected in those juncture points or in those milestones can be very impactful in lessening the heaviness of that process. And And then celebrating milestones together. And that could be a really big one too, where a lot of the process can be about grieving the things that aren't succeeding in the cycle. A lot of the things can feel very painful in terms of getting results that might not be or yield that optimization. But a lot of this is also leaning into moments where there are small wins. Any type of result that comes back that feels like a hope can be celebrated in a way that's with physical touch. It could be with emotional caress. It could be with gentleness with each other. It could be with gratitudes to each other. It could be with words of praise and affirmation and encouragement. All of those things could really go a long way. And again, the spectrum of what intimacy looks like is most useful in moments like this when there is uncertainty, and using intimacy as a tool and a way of feeling that hopefulness can absolutely make a difference in leaning into the unknown, knowing that you're doing that together. So, a big area that I often talk with people about also is what happens with intimacy and sex in particular in early stages of pregnancy. Let's say there is a positive pregnancy test. What happens at that point? What happens in the first trimester in terms of feeling safe and comfortable with moving forward with having that physical connection again, especially if the journey has been very fluttered with pain, very fluttered with trepidation, as well as uh, changes in desire, arousal, as we talked about, as well as that connectedness piece. So, a lot of this is allowing there to be a slower progress into the early stage, understanding too that it's perfectly okay to adjust the intimacy uh, as you go along. There's no one way about going about it. A lot of this is using and leaning in on what the clinicians are saying and suggesting in terms of what comfort is, what symptoms to go by. And a lot of this is knowing what to balance in terms of what feels safe and what's also feeling a little bit more restrictive. So, some of these things could also play a role too in early symptoms of pregnancy when there is likely to be fatigue or nausea, tenderness, and spotting. These things can absolutely have a play in feeling comfortable going and having the sexual intimacy as well. And so, a lot of this is a gentle reminder that this is a season to go through. It does not mean that there needs to be a one way about going about it, but absolutely a way of allowing there to be continued dialogue in this stage to be able to have that openness to invite that connection piece and allow there to be meaningfulness in the connections that are being had along this process as well. So, a thing that I think often comes up for people that I see is when to know what's kind of considered to be common and when to go and seek some additional supports. So a lot of the time, um, people will report changes in their libido and their desire. That's incredibly common for all the reasons that we had listed above. It's also common to have big emotions during and after intimacy, especially with the gravity of, there being so much pressure and focus in on what intimacy can look like during a cycle and during trying to conceive. Um, it's also common to have some avoidance and then reconnection afterwards. And it's also common to have some feelings of resentfulness towards a partner or body. When it could be very useful to go and seek support is when intimacy has completely stopped. It's also maybe worth considering going and seeking support if it's starting to feel like not only is there a lack of the physical intimacy and connection, but also it could be very much a lack of the emotional and the intellectual connectedness as well. So feeling much more like roommates and partners in the process. That can help with, or that can have an impact too in terms of if decision making feels lopsided, if it means that some of these processes are feeling much more isolated and not a together type of experience. Those are things where seeking support could be useful. It could also be useful if a partner is feeling constantly rejected or emotionally unsafe. That's when seeking support can be a useful pursuit. And a persistent feeling of guilt, shame, or body hatred is also where it could be meritful to go and speak with someone about some of those things. I think, the takeaway here is if this doesn't feel beneficial, if it feels like there are things in this process that are really playing more of a toxic trait than is manageable, seeking support can be very useful in trying to uncover and help brainstorm more personalized ways of connecting and having intimacy with partner. And often it is recommended to have supports with the partners together, not just on their own, in order to feel like there's, again, that love and that purpose, in addition to wanting to conceive, of continuing to build on the relationship. So a few mantras that I feel are important to highlight in this are that infertility doesn't need to break intimacy. It can help evolve it. And while this chapter is very hard, it's not the entire story. And I think that that really does speak volumes in terms of really understanding that this is a season. Sex is going to feel different. It can feel different at various stages, not just only in the preconception, but during early pregnancy and even throughout the journey. It can feel very different, especially after hearing different news. It could feel very different after going through different treatment cycles that have not resulted in successful pregnancy. And it could also have a lot of differences. If again, in early stages of pregnancy where there's still very likely to be a lot of fear and trepidation. So understanding that it's leaning into the various stages of what intimacy could look like and not being afraid of those changes, understanding that your worth as a couple and even as individuals isn't tied to fertility, and that this is a time where gentleness and grace is really much a forefront to be able to go and help continue to grow and evolve a person's relationship and a couple's relationship in a way that feels, again, meaningful and connecting, not just, again, for the purpose of conception. So I know I kind of sped through that pretty quickly. So hopefully there's some really good discussions that could be had in the time that we have remaining. And I'm happy to go back through any slides that feel could be useful in kind of reviewing. I know it's easy to kind of talk pretty fast through all of these things. So I do want to give time for any questions, especially if people have questions that are really specific to their own experience too, that they want to kind of ask and propose in this moment.
Thank you so much, Blair. Actually, I had a question. Alicia, do you want to ask a question first, maybe? Go ahead. I saw that you removed your mute. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
sure. I can go first.
Mm.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I have a question about specifically about I think it's very common when people are trying to conceive as well as once you're pregnant for one of the people in the relationship maybe to have more sexual drive than the other person in the relationship. I think that's very common. And what are kind of your top suggestions for dealing with that? Because obviously, maybe for one partner when trying to conceive, it can feel more scheduled. I think typically for the woman, it's more scheduled. Um, I know that's how I was. And then once you're pregnant, your sex drive can change because of hormones and just, you feel crappy in your first trimester. At least I did. And and your partner's sexual drive might not change at all. So I just wondered, how do people navigate that? Because I think that's very common.
Absolutely, very important point. And I think you're right to highlight that it's normal in relationships, period, for there to be ebbs and flows in sexual drive. And it isn't uncommon that specifically too, it could feel for the partner whose experience is that it's like very much a scheduled experience and could feel very disconnecting because of that, that the drive is impacted by that as well. What I think is a useful kind of thing to remember too is that um, the drive is also associated with um, the ability to feel that there's meaning in that action. And so if there is meaningfulness that could be brought in other ways, like orgasm might be wonderful, but that's not the litmus necessarily to feeling that connection piece or that intimacy. So if there can be ways where in a discussion with a partner to say, okay, like I understand that you want to, that your drive is there and that you want to be able to go and have connection. What are some ways that could feel safe for both partners in that way, where it might not result in penetration or orgasm, but could feel that ability to feel meaningfulness in those interactions together? So that could look like, again, having um, caress together. It could look like having moments where there is time together that is designated that doesn't involve the pressure of having intercourse, but definitely could have those physical touch moments, that closeness, those ways where someone feels satisfied in being seen and heard in a different way. And obviously, again, between men and women, there can be some different, again, drives for sure in what feels satisfying, but understanding too that sometimes it's also about being able to navigate what that meaningfulness in the connection looks like. Um, it's it's common because of stressors, because of the overall arching stress of trying to conceive, that that could impact someone's wanting and desire to go and have that physical penetration or orgasm for sure. On that other hand, too, I would say there are ways to have open communication and dialogue about that, which could be for sure awkward, but also an opportunity to really say, like, what other ways can you and I feel meaningful together, meaningful connection with each other, and feel that love and that care, even if for us both right now, it doesn't have that same output of penetration or orgasm. And so dialogue could really go a long way in being able to spell out what someone's needs are. It could also go a long way in spelling out what, you know, what that validation looks like, to say like, yeah, I get it, why it's really like you're touched out right now. I understand that this isn't something that's kind of your top tier to do, but also I don't want to lose out on the moments of us being able to have time together and be able to deepen our relationship and feel seen and heard by each other. So it's about exploring different ways about doing that, and continuing the dialogue to have that ebb and flow.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. And Isabel, I actually have another question, unless you want to ask your question, Isabel. You want me to go again? Or if anybody else has a question, otherwise I will ask again. This one's a little bit of like a heavier question, but navigating intimacy after like a loss, I also know that that's very common, especially if you are spotting and things like that. But um navigating not being afraid of intimacy after having a loss, maybe you had a loss that you kind of found out about during intimacy or something like that. That is what happened to me. But navigating that after and not being afraid of it, because personally I was very, very afraid of intimacy for a very, very long time after that. And I'm not anymore, but I was for a very long time. So navigating that and just yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I first want to say I'm so sorry that that was your experience, and thank you for sharing in this forum, Alice. And I think the first and foremost thing that I would say is there's no timeline for having to kind of rush into anything when and if it doesn't feel comfortable to do so. So a lot of this is listening to what your body's yes is saying and what your body's no is saying. And that could be really challenging because your body's yes and no might be different from your partner's yes and no. And it goes kind of tied into the question that you had before. But I think a lot of this is separating to what's a fear versus a fact, knowing that too, some of this is very fear driven, especially if your experience has been, I don't want this to happen again. I'm really afraid that I'm going to or this is going to be the cause of something not succeeding again. Separating the fears from what you've been told from the clinic, what you've been told from your medical team that is safe, going over what, again, I think I had a slide about this, hold on, I'm going to go back for a second. Here, just, balancing like the safety part of it. And that safety is also the emotional safety, not just the physical safety. So again, like maybe it's about going slow. Maybe it's about reintegrating what touch feels like in a way that feels comforting. If touch, on certain body parts feels like it's a safe zone, start with that. It doesn't have to go right into penetration or intercourse in order to go and feel like that's the only way of reintegrating that intimacy and connection again. So sometimes it's a matter of, again, just going slower, reestablishing what tolerance looks like. And again, I know it's a bit of like the broken record, but talking out the fears so that everyone has a good understanding of where each other are at in this, so that it doesn't feel, again, so isolating.
Great, thank you.
I think a lot of this is just knowing and trusting your own instincts in this. And that, again, might be quite different than a partner's instincts if they're not going through the same physical experiences of seeing and like seeing spotting, for example, or, undertaking what that similar sensations that you've had before. So I think a lot of this is, again, going back to what your body's yes and no is saying and being able to communicate that with a partner.
Totally.
Any other questions, Isabel? Is there anything else that you wanted to ask about?
No. Alicia actually touched on my question, which was about after a loss. So yeah. Thank you so much, Blair. Thank you for this amazing presentation. It was very interesting, actually, and I think it's definitely a topic that is not spoken enough. So I'm glad that you accepted to host this webinar for us tonight. So perfect. I wanted to say that they can contact you via Inform Fertility, but your contacts are out there. So anybody that want to contact you afterwards, they can. The recording will be available tomorrow on our YouTube channel, and we will share it on our social media, e-newsletter, and everybody who registered to this webinar will also receive the recording by email. So thank you very much. And next webinar will be on November 19th with Dr. Rahi Victory, and he's going to talk about male fertility. And so, yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much again, Blair, for tonight. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and I hope to see you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.